Hi, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Brad Loomis and Eric Helms as we talk about training by feel. Now, this conversation hits on quite a few topics surrounding autoregulation and perceived exertion. Basically, how should training feel, and how do we use these feels to navigate through our programming in attempts to increase our fitness while managing fatigue? We hit on quite a few misconceptions about auto-regulated training and discuss many of the tools that can help us keep track of our progress over time, even when our 1RM isn't going up. So this episode will be extremely useful for athletes and coaches who would like to learn more about how to use their body's feedback as a tool for continued growth. So I really hope you guys like this one. Here is Training by Feel with Brad Loomis and Eric Helms. Brad, when you started training, were you like, if I leave this gym with 1/2 an ounce of energy, then I didn't do it right? Like back in the day?
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually an excellent summary. Were you actually there?
I think I was like a fetus. No, I'm just kidding. I just called you old in a not nice way. No, I wasn't there, but I think we all did though. We've talked about it, but how many years do you think that lasted?
It was a good long time. That was a good long time. I mean, when I went to the gym, I had this mindset that every time I put my hands around the bar, it was go time, and I was building muscle on this set right here, you know. And it was partially kind of, I guess, just kind of the because I was kind of groomed using maximum overload training to where it was like every set you took it to positive failure. And if you made your rep target, you went up immediately. And if you didn't, you tried again, you know. But yeah, I remember that pretty vividly. And I think that was kind of one of the origins of a lot of my issues that I have now.
Well, I think we all, not we all, but at least the 5 of us, right? And I can speak for probably more than half the people that are in fitness or whatever, that we didn't differentiate training from exercising. And y'all said it in another episode, the animal pack ads, but like it was just, you know, go hard or go home, and you should be, if you weren't sore, like it didn't work. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's where we get into the people that do curls to failure, or the girls that do the donkey kicks to failure 5 times a week kind of thing. And now we've all gotten into, not say we all, but it's a really big thing now, this RPE, autoregulation type of training. And do you think, since it's one of your parts of study, that you could summarize autoregulation for us, Eric? Because you're so smart and stuff.
I can talk about autoregulation, definitely.
Okay.
So autoregulation is basically just, you know, like it's a buzzword. It's a very hot topic, but anyone who knows anything about exercise science knows that the principle of individualization is key. Yet when we talk about exercise principles, we talk about it in general terms, you know. So autoregulation is basically a systematic way to try to individualize exercise prescription. RPE is just one small piece of that, one way of expressing it. And it's basically the way of auto-regulating the load on the bar or the intensity of exercise at, you know, it's rating of perceived exertion. So if you were to use it in a aerobic setting, you might use a 6-20 original Borg scale that correlates nicely with, you know, resting heart rate at 60 to max heart rate at 200. If you were going to use it for resistance training, you'd base it on a 1-10 scale based on repetitions and reserves. So where 10 is I couldn't do more load, I couldn't do more reps. A 9 is I could do 1 more rep. A 9.5 is I could maybe add 1 more pound to that and do the same number of reps, and on downward, you know, 8 being 2 reps in reserve 7. So it's just creating a systematic approach to individualizing the exercise prescription that you're using. Okay.
That is a really good springboard to, like, again, 47 questions that I'd like to go into. It is, though, because you said they're tools, right? RPE is a tool for autoregulation, whereas a lot of people think that is the way that you auto-regulate resistance training, like the way. Can you explain, I guess, why that confusion occurs in Or in your opinion, like, why do people think there's like percentage or RPE and like none, and how that's it? It's that or that.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the typical way that we originally learned how to train.
Okay.
And this is something I say when I educate personal trainers. I'd be like, I try to tell them, you should be doing something different than a Group X instructor. A Group X instructor and you should be different beyond the fact that one of you is with one person and one's with a class. And I think a lot of personal trainers, they figure out what their client's going to do 10 minutes before they come in, or all their clients are doing a similar exercise, or it's just, what article did I read that week, or what's interesting. So they're basically giving very hard workouts, just one minor step up from that of just giving them progressively harder workouts is a great step in the right direction, but very rarely does the average personal trainer actually have a program. We're often taught, like if you were just going to a gym with a bunch of bodybuilders and you're like, hey, what's your program? They would tell you, I do X, Y, and Z on Monday, X, Y, and Z on Wednesday, X, Y, Z on Friday, and X, Y, Z on Saturday. And that's not a program, that's a microcycle. That's just them repeating the same microcycle all the time and just trying to go heavier. So what I'm getting at, what I'm describing, is that we don't have a full understanding of how to actually have a plan. So when we hear something like, oh, you use an RPE scale for load, that's not just one little tool, a little part of the plan. That's everything, right? You're on the RPE. It's kind of like, oh, you're on the DUP, So how do you train? I train autoregulation. That's like, to me, that's like saying, I train frequency. It's like, what do you mean? Like, so I think a lot of it is just that most people, until they know better, look in very limited terms at the way they program and exercise.
Right. And I think it's, I guess me too, I've noticed that a lot of my athletes will ask me about RPE, what is it, and why don't we do it? And like, on one hand, I'm like, well, if you're not doing percentage based on your accessories, you're sort of, if you're using any type of data or feel, like I feel great today, my accessories went up because they have the freedom to, like, kind of that is you auto regulating. And because they don't see it as, if there's not a label of repetitions in reserve, then it's not auto regulation. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Does that happen to you guys too? With your, like, when people question things? Brad, explain what other things people, I guess some questions that are good examples of how we know that this is a very common misunderstanding. You mentioned some before we started, Brad. As far as feeling.
Hopefully I'm on the same page for you. But a lot of folks, they a lot of times when we make a plan, the first microcycle or two could easily be an introduction of more volume to come. And that's part of the plan. And so during that introduction, we'll hear back many times, well, it doesn't feel like it's working. And, naturally our response is, what should it feel, like it's working? Because right now, this is what it is. But, you have to look at the whole forest and not just the one tree. What's coming up in 3 or 4 weeks? And then, of course, when they come back in 3 or 4 weeks, they're like, oh, yeah, okay, now I understand. This is really freaking hard right now. And it's, you have to look at the entire plan and not just how things are looking right now. And so hopefully that answers your question.
That's one of them,
but yeah, that's oftentimes a big misinterpretation, is that it needs to feel like it's working. It needs to be hard all the time. It needs to be hard, but it needs to be hard in context of the entire plan. I mean, you can't just always make it easy. You can't just always deload. There's got to be certain points in time when it needs to be really freaking hard. And it's probably sometimes harder than it really feels like it should be. But in context, there's times when that needs to happen. And then there's other times when it should be, oh, thank goodness, this is a bit of a respite. You know what I mean? And so just because we started with that respite doesn't mean that there is not, a plan in place.
Right. Eric, you talked about when you're starting to coach personal trainers, or I guess when you're talking to personal trainers, how they have a very, not even misguided, but a very black or white mentality, I guess, still, right? And at what point, when we've taught someone how to program, right, for longevity, and they meet someone for the first time and they're like, okay, here's your program, black and white, as I say, they might even prescribe poundages if someone's very new. And then how do you, I guess, evolve that into someone who is auto-regulating or individualizing their program to themselves? Does that make sense? Like, if you have someone who's very new, they don't even know what weights to use. They assume, well, I can curl this much, that's how much I should do. I can squat this much, that's how much I should do. Whereas we take them back a few steps. I don't know if that question made sense. Like, how do they get from black and white starting point, it's a good guess, to like, okay, now it's programming for this individual because we're seeing how they're progressing, seeing what they can manage, all that stuff.
So to clarify your question, it started like you asked me two things. One was, at what point does it change from the personal trainer to the person being able to train themselves? And the other piece was, when do they actually understand the difference between training people constantly in a hard microcycle versus having a plan?
Okay,
So
let's say if it was
that question.
Yeah, I'll try. I don't know if I'm asking. It would be more useful for me to ask as an individual, or I guess let's do it that way. So I walk in the gym, I pick up. If I'm real smart, maybe starting strength. If I'm not, I picked a program off of Pinterest that's body weight or something, right? And I want to progress over the next year, 5 years, whatever. How would you recommend someone going from like, okay, a cookie cutter routine into now I need to tailor it for myself based on my individual needs, how I'm feeling, my progress, stuff like that? I know that's really open-ended, but take it wherever you like. We got time.
Yeah, it is pretty open-ended, but I think I'll narrow it down to the context of maybe bodybuilding and powerlifting.
Okay.
Since that's probably our audience.
Yeah.
So the typical, powerlifter starts with a basic program, maybe like a starting strength or kind of a West Side template. But, they got their exercise selection down. They're doing some accessory movements, and they're just trying to get stronger week by week by week every time they step in the gym.
Right.
Most beginning powerlifters are okay with just doing that, because there's going to be a period of time where they just simply can do that. The big hurdle for bodybuilders is to simply understand that that's something they want to be doing, is actually seeing progressive overload in a quantifiable way. I think, like Brad, well, probably actually worse than Brad. Maybe not. I started just like most bodybuilders, just like this should be progressively harder, and not necessarily having any objective way of determining that. So, one of the things, like if we want to go back to RPE, just understanding that intensity of effort can be objective, because I think that's the big issue, is the subjectivity, right?
Yeah.
And so when I talk about RPE, it's basically the effort per set, or the intensity of effort, as you might say it. While the percentage of 1RM is just the load based on what your theoretical max is. The issue with just using percentage 1RM, and there's also issues with just using RPE, is that, and I was recently part of a study where they did this in Zerdos's lab. They had people do a 1RM. These are trained people, and then they covered the weights with like a trash bag so they can't actually see what the weight is, and they had them do an AMRAP, and they would call out how close to failure they thought they were. But then they took the set all the way to failure, like being motivated by people in the gym, loud music, exercise professionals saying, no, you got another one, keep going, no, at least try it, even if you don't think you can get it, go.
Yeah.
And there was a range of people getting 9 to 26 reps. Your traditional exercise textbook, and these aren't like endurance athletes, this is just people who lift weights. Your traditional textbooks would probably assume at 70% of 1RM you'd fail between 8 to 15, somewhere in there, right? So it's huge individual variability there. That has to do with their muscular endurance conditioning, their psychological status, how well they can hold up their form. I mean, so many things go into that, maybe even muscle type stuff, muscle fiber type rather. And so one way to get around that is just by having RPE, which you just say, how far from failure am I? And that's a more objective way of quantifying your effort rather than just going, whew, that was hard, kind of thing, which cuts both ways, right? So if you're the person who is always crushing yourself, you might be overdoing it. And if you're the person who maybe is too conservative, you won't be meeting those planned objectives like Brad was talking about, like what a deload should feel like, what an overreaching period should feel like, what your just standard start of a microcycle that isn't an intro week should feel like. You're getting the work done. It's challenging, but it's not hard. Someone who is underestimating that is probably overreaching when they should be in a normal state. And someone who's way too conservative is going to be like continuing their intro week, and it's too easy, and they're actually not getting the conditioning they need. They're not getting as effective of a response from the repeated bout effect, So when they actually do go hard, they won't be prepared for it. So bringing some individualized objectivity is kind of the goal of auto-regulation. And I know I've kind of dovetailed off what your original question was.
It's good stuff.
Well, good. But yeah, basically people need to have an idea of what their actual goal is. If they don't really know how are they going to get from point A to point B, then they won't know what tools to use. So that's where auto-regulation comes in.
Okay, now, in terms of those tools that you just mentioned, how would that differ if I'm a intermediate powerlifter versus an intermediate bodybuilder? When you said both are useful, yeah, cause based on goals. Not that they'd always be different. But
yeah, I think a good way to look at auto-regulation is the same way we look at like volume, intensity, frequency, periodization. They're all just ways of setting up training and prescribing it. Like you would still auto-regulate intensity if you were a bodybuilder or a powerlifter. Where you would decide how many reps far from failure you'd be would be specific to the program and what your overreaching looked like and what your rep range was and what the exercise was. So
yeah,
where whether you used a flexible system where you would if I feel good today, I'll do my hard day, I'll do my easy day, or I'll pick where my accessories are going to be, would still be similar in both situations.
Yeah, I guess where my question was like if I'd strictly had 1RM goals versus if I had growth hypertrophy goals. Not that they're independent, but I'm still, and it's a personal thing, I'm still stuck on how mind blown I am how much 1RM as a skill is underrated. Like teaching someone how to feel what that feels like is where I think what I was getting at with that question was like, how do you train someone to feel those repetitions in reserve as well? Because from what my experience and like the people that I work with, I've seen that bodybuilders are usually not as skilled at knowing how much they have in the tank. And it might be because their food's varying often. It might be just because, again, the powerlifter is so familiar with those 3 lifts.
It cuts both ways. I've seen issues, and a lot of it comes down to training experience, and it comes down to maturity as well. So there are a number of tools I implement. First, you have to get it down to, all right, if you're coaching them, it's a little easier. You can see it. You can just tell them, dude, you're always overcutting or undercutting your RPEs. Like, it's a 7 and you were grinding that shit out like it was your 3rd attempt. Or was that really a 7? Because honestly, it looked like that bar was going to fly out of your hands if you hadn't slowed it down at the top of that bench kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So if it is just simply an ego issue, then you just need to check it at the door and work on that. And recognize that you don't just get to be as strong as you wish you were, and then your rating doesn't change it. Like if you say it was a 9, it was actually a 10. Add 5 kilos and see what happens. You're gonna miss it. You're not gonna get it. Doesn't matter how you feel about it. If it's simply just I'm not good at rating RPEs, then there are some things you can do. A huge one I like to use for people that's very important and very useful is just record the set and don't rate your RPE until you see it. And you can start to get a visual connection to the kinesthetic, and you can kind of blend your different senses, and you can get a much better rating. You can also do things like actually instituting some failure training purposefully so that people actually know what it's like to go to failure. And each spotters, of course, you got to do it safely, but doing AMRAPs and training on a regular basis at different percentages, you know what it's like to hit failure at, say, 85% and at 90%. You know what it's like to do a 2 to 4 RM and a 6 to 8 RM. And I think that's a very useful skill because another thing we found in that same study I mentioned is that the higher number of reps you did, the less accurate you were able to assess how near failure you were far away. And I think that's a combination of just, you got to do a lot of reps, but also there's other factors. Like, it feels hard. If you're doing a set of 20 on squats, even when you're 5 reps from failure, it feels like death. Like 15 reps on squats, even technically a 5 RPE is, if you're not conditioned for it, that's lone cardio.
Mm-hmm.
There's metabolic, shit going on. You can still crank out more reps because you have the force production capacity, but it's still hard, so it's difficult to rate. So unless you actually develop that specific skill, you won't know it. So it comes down to specificity.
Right. Okay. And to get back to, I guess, the heart of why this is even half important is, like, Brad, you said that there's a lot of people, you'll give them an intro block and they're like, this is too easy, and you say, well, we have this bigger plan, right? And the bigger plan just being that there's some periodization involved, right? And so the whole purpose of that is so that we can manage our fitness and fatigue. And I think you do a really good job explaining why that's important. In some of those videos that you've done, would you mind taking a few minutes to kind of go over the fitness fatigue model, Brad?
Yeah. Let's see. How should I best do that? Probably, I think the easiest way that I like to explain it is that the marathon runner.
Yeah.
Eric, would you agree? Is that a pretty good analogy? The marathon runner tapering for a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one most people are familiar with too.
Okay, yeah.
So
if you think about a marathon runner who's getting ready for, say, his first or his second marathon, he's going to have weeks and weeks of training leading up to his event, right? Marathon's 26 miles. He's not just going to start running 26 miles right off the bat. In fact, he's probably not even going to start with half of that. He's going to start with, a quarter to 2/3 of that. And he's going to have specific training days. He's going to have periodization. Day 1 is maybe a 3-mile run. Day 2, a couple days later, maybe his long run where he does 8 miles. I keep saying he, but I should say he or she, the athlete will say that. And then maybe the final run of the week, the athlete might, have a middle of the road run, something like 5 miles. And they keep building miles. They keep building volume, miles and miles and miles. And so by the time that they're kind of at their overreaching state, their long run in the middle of the week might be 20 miles. Their first run of the week could be something like, 10 or 12, and then their intermediate run could be like 15, somewhere in there. Now, if that's their overreaching stage, kind of the peak of the volume of their training, are they going to want to run their marathon the very next week? No, because they're in a very overtrained state. They've built up all of these miles and miles and miles and miles. They've built up all of this fitness. They're now in fantastic shape. However, they're also very fatigued. They're very tired. They're gonna feel pretty darn beat up, and they're not going to want to go into their event that way. So then probably, in the weeks leading to their event, the next week after their real big overreaching week when they ran that 20-mile run, the next one, their long run might be 15. Okay. Their medium run might be 12. Their short run might be 10. The very next week, their long run may be, 12. Their medium run might be 8. Their short run might be 4. Okay. So during this period of time, when all of their mileage has dropped, they've probably maintained speed the whole time. Okay. But all of that fatigue has been dissipated. It's now becoming easier and easier to run. Now, have they become fat and out of shape during that 2-week period? No, it took, weeks and weeks and weeks, and all of this fitness has kind of drug up those levels of fatigue. And the body, it's not even a long enough period of time for the body to even recognize, oh, wow, we actually are running shorter runs. It just knows that it's still running. And then once all of that fatigue has been dissipated, the levels of fitness are still very high. And they're going to go into the event when they're running 26 miles. Basically, what I like to say, they're going to feel like Superman. They're going to have all of that fitness, all of those miles that they've built up are now going to be able to be expressed without being masked by the fatigue. And so that's probably, I think, what I feel is like one of the best and most familiar, ways to make an analogy of the fitness fatigue model. So yes, they did have to make their runs very hard and very strenuous and very, feeling like death. But it was one period of time in a whole course of a plan that happened over weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So imagine if we are a weight trainer, a weightlifter, imagine how it feels to start each and every cycle with fatigue levels here. Fitness still up here. And our listeners can't really see this on podcasts, but imagine starting each and every, mesocycle, microcycle of training with strength and fitness being very high and then fitness being very low. If you can recycle that over and over and over again, that's a fantastic.
You mean
fantastic
fatigue being very low, right?
Correct. Did I say it backwards?
Yeah, that's okay.
You said
starting
fitness,
each and every mesocycle with fitness and strength very high and fatigue very low.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you mind if I jump in a little bit there?
Go for it.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's basically an exercise plan, and that's where any coach worth his salt needs to be at to effectively program, or if an individual is programming for themselves, they need to understand those principles. The difficult part is then dealing with your emotional responses and your fears during that, because when you are overreaching and feeling wrecked, you think something is wrong. And when you are tapering and it feels too easy, you're not sure if you are fit because you're not running that many miles. And during the intro week, you're worried about whether you're actually building enough fitness. Am I preparing myself? And sometimes people will look at auto-regulation as the solution to this. This always gives me the perfect, training. But really what auto-regulation does is it's something that piggybacks on periodization and ensures that the goal of periodization is being met. Because this very sterile model that we give of the stress you experience is only from running, and the fatigue you experience is only from running, and the fitness you get is only from running, it ignores the fact that you're a human outside of the gym all the time, and you're incurring stress from all these different places. So, there's a handful of studies that show that negative life events impact strength development in like a dose response model to a small extent, that stressed out people are not as strong as less stressed out people. So the reality is no matter how well we micromanage, say, like volume load as a coach, it's not going to perfectly predict performance because of there's other stresses that affect the body. And as I heard once from one of my teachers, and I like to repeat, stress is stress is stress is stress. It all elicits a very similar stress response. The duration of the magnitude might be different, but that impacts your fatigue and your recovery and therefore your long-term performance. So there are things you can do to just ensure that you're at where you're supposed to be. So, for example, in a peaking cycle for a powerlifting meet, you're eventually going to be getting up to doing heavy singles near your 1RM, and you're going to start, if you are doing singles early on, at a pretty low percentage, like, 75, 80%. And that may or may not, like on paper, a single at 90% should be something that's hard, but you always get. In real life, that sometimes might be all you possibly have. That's why we open someone up at a powerlifting meet at 90%. That's like worst case scenario, you'll probably still get that. So the way you piggyback auto-regulation, specifically RPE, on periodization is you go, right, you're going to do, 5 sets for 5 reps at a 75% of your 1 rep max. And however, all your sets should fall between like a 6 to 8 RPE at the highest, That way, if they're having a fantastic day, they can increase the load, or if they're having a terrible day, they can actually decrease the load, so that the intended stress of the workout matches their actual physical response and due to their emotional state and other things that are affecting them. Sleep's not going to be perfect. They may have gotten in a fight with a family member or whatever. So auto-regulation really is not useful, in my opinion, unless you understand kind of the tenets of planning in the first place. It doesn't need to be incredibly complex, but it's not just training by feel. And I think a lot of people, sometimes they hear me talk about auto-regulation, or they hear other people talk about auto-regulation. They're like, see, I knew it, man. Me just going in the gym and winging it was always the right way to go, bro. And it's like, no, that's not really what it is, man. Like, honestly, me training by feel was killing myself all the time. And other people's training by feel, yeah, like, and if you look at studies on RPE, when you give it to just lay sedentary people who are exercising for the first time who are not bodybuilders, they often train at too low of an intensity to elicit an effective response, So training by feel without direction might work if you have the exactly right psychology and experience and all that, but most people don't. They either are on one end of the spectrum or the other. So they need to use it in conjunction with a plan.
And I'd like to argue that it's like, out of say every 10 athletes I have, I don't feel like it's appropriate for at least half of them, even if they do have competitive goals yet. Like, I feel like I still get the things that Brad gets, right? Like, well, it didn't feel hard. This week feels easy. What's wrong? Or this week's killing me. What's wrong? And I don't think it's for a lack of trust. I think it is, like you said, just a lack of education. And then that's our role, I guess, is to explain why that is, and all that stuff. But I think people would be surprised that it's not just the number of hours or years in the gym that make you able to be familiar with this within yourself. It's actually a lot of self-awareness, a lot of thinking during your lifts.
I think, and a lot of it, it's so much of it is not just telling your athletes what to do, or even telling yourself if you're programming yourself, but knowing why and how it's supposed to happen, you know? So, like, if you're a savvy powerlifter, you might just go, right, I'm going to do small F, or I'm going to do Shiko, or Shiko is probably a better example, because if you know how to string it together, it actually makes a lot of sense. And there are buildups, there are intro cycles, and there are peaking cycles. But if you don't actually understand what those words mean and how they interconnect, you don't know how it's supposed to feel. You'll still be nervous and second guessing everything all the time, even if you did have a properly set up periodization plan. And I've worked with some pretty good coaches for like powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, bodybuilding, because I like to, learn from other people and the like. And I've had to just, call my coach and be like, hey man, am I supposed to be getting crushed right now? Yeah. I just want to make sure, is that the plan right now? Like, cause if it is, fine, fantastic, and asking him things like, hey, so I've got a 3x3. I actually cannot do a triple at this weight right now. Can I do, 3 doubles or 4 doubles in a single? Yeah. Is the volume more important right now, or is it me going near max? And the answer is different sometimes depending on what's going on. And I think the key to what I did was not just going in there crushing it or going, my coach doesn't know what he's doing, throw down my weight belt and just do one set. It is actually, I made the role, it is my job as an athlete to contact my coach and make sure I was doing what the program intended. So it's a failing on both sides that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. If you as a coach, you don't explain, here's what you should be experiencing at these various parts, which is why we do like weekly check-ins with a lot of our athletes, and why we give things like RPE in conjunction with load, so they know what that should feel like. Then that's our bad. Likewise, if the athlete doesn't make an effort to ensure they understand that, that's their bad kind of thing. So and if you're programming yourself, you need to do some research and figure out why did you choose Shiko besides, well, a whole bunch of people on the forum said it was good kind of thing,
Yeah. I think that's something else you talked about a few minutes ago was like fearing that they're not doing enough. And I think that's, one, it can happen on a daily basis, but two, something else I wanted us to talk about is like when someone is running a very heavy cycle or a very intentional cycle and they hit new maxes that they haven't hit before. Say they're running a heavy squat thing or whatever. This happened to me earlier this year. PR after PR after PR. And then you come out of it, and then if you can't hit at that same intensity or it doesn't feel as easy, then it's immediately, oh, I lost strength. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily the case. It's not that you don't have that in you. It's just that was your very specific aim for that period of time. And I think you'd explain it once too. It's like if you go forward 5 steps, you come out of that cycle and you kept 3 of those steps, it was successful. But a lot of people will see it as like, well, I lost the 2 steps, so it was worthless. Yeah.
And that's even more true for someone like yourself who has more than 3 skills to develop, and it's still very performance oriented. Like you simply cannot be, you can, as an intermediate powerlifter, you can still make progress on all 3 lifts at the same time and do pretty well. At a high level as a powerlifter, I always say, like, hey, if 2 are staying the same and 1's going up, that's good. If 2 are going up and 1's staying the same, that's freaking great. And if you're managing to get progress on all 3 lifts simultaneously, well, fucking hooray, yeah. Because it does take a lot of effort and volume and intentionality to get something to progress at a high level. And it often means that you don't have the resources physiologically or psychologically or even time sometimes to do enough to get the others to progress without them hindering each other,
Right.
So for someone who's doing grid like yourself, of course you can't have a gymnastics and a strength and a aerobic and an anaerobic conditioning cycle. It's just not possible,
Right.
So, and for the powerlifters listening, I often will say, hey, great, your one rep max went up, but did your one rep minimum go up too? Like, on a bad day, can you squat more than you used to? That's an important metric as well. I think sometimes we look at our absolutely peaked out of our mind fantastic day on Thursday where, we had Rage Against the Machine blasting, and you accidentally took a double scoop of your pre-workout, and your legs felt great, and you crushed a 10-pound PR, and you expect, okay, that's what I always have to do now when I do it. It's like, well, that's not a realistic, goal. You can't over-celebrate your PRs, and you can't over get depressed by the times when you're weak. You have to look at, is my performance band of good day at the top, bad day at the bottom, is that going up, not just is my peak higher, because that doesn't tell you the full story.
Yeah, and people get I think people forget that the better you get, quote unquote, the better you get, the less often you're going to hit your best, if that makes sense. So like Brad, to further illustrate, like, tell me about the last year of your big three. Like, how much did each of them increase? Did some of them decrease at certain times? How were your meet performances? Stuff like that. As far as, like, I'm sure they all didn't go up 30 pounds, but, like, how did they wave, I guess, in and out for you?
I have to say that, really, to be honest with you, the last year has been a really eye-opening experience for me. And so it just goes to show you that, even with 17, 18 years in, you can still learn stuff. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I mean, I went through a period of time where basically I did not plan for progression. It just happened. You know what I mean? And so basically what ended up happening was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm not even going to think about one rep maxes. I'm not going to think about how my training is really, quote unquote feeling. I'm just going to train. And about that same time was when I started training here at home, and I started letting go of ego, and I kind of started, training in a nice variety of rep ranges and whatnot. And then so after about probably 18 months of doing that, I then started being coached. And I thought, well, you know what? I think it's probably a good idea for me at this point to, let's start thinking about actually tracking things here a little bit and kind of see where I'm at. You know what I mean? And that's when kind of like the magic kind of started happening, And I started realizing that, even though my average, say, intensity might be like 80% right now, the 80% is feeling better. It's feeling better and better and better, So yeah, I'm not necessarily hitting new PRs, but 80% is feeling lighter and lighter and lighter. You know what I mean? And then probably a big aha moment was when I came to the eye-opening actual feeling of what a true deload feels like, and what it feels like to express strength and express all of that work with all of that fatigue gone. And that Superman effect that I was just talking about. And that happened basically just over a year ago. And it was like, I understood now, okay, this is what it feels like to have all of that buildup of fatigue gone, having built all of that strength, being able to express it, and then realize I'm not going to be able to hit those numbers again for probably another 6 months. And I was okay with that. If it was me probably 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been trying to hit those numbers again, next week, next month, whatever. And then, like Eric said, probably been a little bit exasperated, just defeated. Why can't I hit these numbers now? So yeah, it was a big eye-opening experience. And so now when you look at like that last year of training, those peak 1RMs have gone up, but they've happened like every 6 months. And then all the while I'm doing all this training and all of this buildup, trying to make the 70 and 80% stuff feel better and better and better and better. And it goes through times where it doesn't feel good, like where it goes through times where like I have to take this 87.5% and I have to divvy the volume up over different sets. And it's important to know, okay, during this period of time, it should feel that way, And a lot of times I can kind of tell by what Eric is giving me, okay, this is going to be really freaking hard, and I can kind of expect that. And then during other periods of time, it's just going to flow. It's going to feel really, really good. It's going to feel, kind of like I am actually progressing. But the hard part is when Eric said, when life's stresses build up and it masks that. And then, it gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
Mind if can I jump in for a second just to give us props to Brad? So it's been very cool working with Brad for almost a year now. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it's been exactly a year. Yeah. Because
Brad does all Brad is we have trust, and he also is a good communicator. The few times when he's like, hey, here's how I'm feeling, this isn't working, I've got a pain, or I'm feeling wrecked, or I don't have my scheduling is an issue, he brings it up and it's very easy to deal with. So he makes my job easy, and also he does this, so he understands the whys and the hows behind what I'm doing. So it makes sense, and he has easy access to me. But yeah, it's on the coaching side of it, it's very interesting as well, because I've come to learn through my studies and my experience, and as an athlete and as a coach, that manipulating progress is on paper relatively, for most cases, especially with a straightforward athlete like Brad, it's just a simple equation of having them do more over time and getting more specific as they get close to competition, and progressively challenging them, and then allowing them to recover and building it up, and only doing as much as you need to have them do. And it's a dangerous game, because if you know that volume is the thing most associated with performance increases, it's very easy to accidentally just saturate issues with volume. I can't get this guy to progress, I'm just gonna want to rock him with more volume. And you have to ensure that you're doing it in a conservative way, so that you don't end up causing an injury or just burning them out or making them hate the sport, and that's the thing, is Brad's pretty self-aware, he's communicative, and it's that thing where I'm building a lot with the 70 to 80% range, and touching in the 85, 90 a little bit, and then we have a very specific peaking protocol, and he responds very well to it. He's very textbook in the way he responds, and it's cool to see that and to hear how it feels, because it actually, Brad's one of my more actually, Bryce is too. Bryce is very textbook, except he doesn't really feel good during deloads. Brad actually feels deloaded, Bryce feels bad, and then performs well. So it's always interesting where there's disconnects between the way people feel and the way they perform. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, it all comes down to communication, which is interesting.
Whenever you said that Brad will come to you when he says like, hey, this isn't working, da da da, what are examples of this isn't working? Brad,
so
what were they? Or either of y'all?
Oh yeah. He can tell us about his old.
Well, one of the, and this is outside of training and feeling overworked, peaked, et cetera, et cetera. I'm having trouble right now getting all this work in. Okay.
You mean work in the gym?
Should I go ahead? Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I've got a list of stuff that I got to get done. Basically, I need to get it done in a week. And during this period of time, because of scheduling issues, I'm behind. Here's what should I do here, Eric? Should I go ahead and stretch this cycle out over maybe 8 or 9 days, or should I skip some work? And what should I skip? And so, it was very easy. It's like, I really, really work hard to get your main lifts in, skip some accessory work. I'd rather you just skip some accessory work than to stretch this microcycle out. Done. It was as easy as that, and then because that was kind of a hard period of time, it did kind of, deloads didn't feel like deloads, you know what I mean? So then I had to basically come back to Eric and I'm saying, okay, you know what, mission accomplished. I got the work done. But boy, I'll tell you what, I had to really cram some stuff together, and now I'm feeling a bit beat up. So he had to kind of revamp the plan a little bit. Okay, well, this next, mesocycle, let's go ahead and take some of this volume and shift it over to the accessory work. Take some of the volume away from the big lifts, and then we'll kind of taper that down so that the accessory work is coming down, the volume is coming up on the big work, and then at the last minute we'll start adding in the heavy loads and get you used to lifting heavier loads with all this, other stuff kind of going away. And at least right now, I mean, it's felt like it's been pretty darn effective. You know what I mean? But there's two good examples of it wasn't working because of scheduling. We were busy, and I couldn't get my days in like I needed them to. You know what I mean? And so we had to make adjustments. And then because of those adjustments, it made me able to get back on schedule again. But then I was having the feeling of, wow, I'm now being crushed when I really shouldn't be. And so then we could adjust accordingly. So it all comes back to, kind of like Eric said, we have to take it in the context. How should things be right now? And you know what? We can move stuff around and make it feel like it basically like it should, in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done similar things with other athletes. I've got an athlete who is doing his undergraduate degree in exercise science, and he's doing a number of courses where they have to do exercise and sport, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. Like he had this project where he comes in and he's got 3 people in his group, and they have to coach the other people in the group through exercise. And he's like, so yeah, I just did a hell of a lot of burpees today, and it's heavy squats. And I'm like, okay, so here's what we do,
Yeah.
So, giving them a flexible model where they can move their days around, where they have a checklist to get things done. This same athlete, I have a color-coded accessory list. So I have priorities. I have get it done if it's nice. And these are, hey, if you're having a good week, you feel great, and you have extra time, do it. So I have kind of like priority 1, 2, and 3 on accessory work. I've got people who, like Brad, he has a list of things to get done, and he knows, obviously don't do like hypertrophy immediately after your heaviest work, So it's there has to be some guidelines there. But that's really what all autoregulation comes back to, is giving someone guidelines to adjust in the moment to keep the plan, in its core form.
Yeah, and easy, like you said, easy things like that is checklists, right? You said color coding, so if you have the energy, you can add this extra fluff, but this is what needs to happen. An easy one I'll do is like create a 6-day program, and you can do, as long as you do 4 days, I don't care. So if this 8 weeks takes you 10 weeks, that's fine.
Yeah.
What else? What else can I be missing? Is easy ways to, besides RPE as the tool, right? Other ways to auto-regulate.
So there's a number of them out there, and more options are going to become available as technology changes. One thing I'm playing with on my deadlifts right now is I allow a certain amount of drop in my velocity.
That's right.
Before I will stop. So, for example, I allow my velocity to fall by 20%, and that tells me how many sets I'm doing, and I just do singles on my deadlift. It's a very specific tool, but it's one of those things. It's like they're all specific tools in a way. And we've got research on what we already talked about, like a flexible model of when you do which days in the week, and we know that's at least as good, if not better, than having rigid days. We're even doing, part of my thesis is doing research on what tends to predict performance better, like a 1 to 10 score, just how you feel on that day, or is it your heaviest warm-up RPE, like a single at 85% of your 1RM, does that predict your strength? So there's a lot to be done in the future, and we don't have an incredible amount of super solid answers. But I think the principles of being able to adjust to your schedule, doing the amount of volume needed and not more, and specific to what the goal is at the time, and then having that match up with RPE. Like, for example, in the way we get around that whole "this feels too easy" or "it feels too hard" thing is in the study I'm doing right now, my dissertation or my PhD final study. They have an intro week, and there's an RPE attached to it. So they know you're only doing 2 sets instead of 3, and it's a 5 to 7 RPE. So instead of them freaking out and going, that was really easy, they go, yeah, that was a 5 RPE. I'm like, perfect, because you're not used to doing, bench and squat 3 days per week. You've done it once per week. So if I had you do that immediately at a 6 to 8 RPE with 3 sets per exercise, you get crushed, and I wouldn't have you in the next week of the study. You'd have a, tendonitis issue. So, when you put the RPE there, and you give a percentage 1RM, and you help them understand that they can be flexible with their schedule, those are all elements of auto-regulation and giving the person tools and guidelines and the ability to do that on their own, yet still meet your plan. It's the same principles we have with flexible dieting, right? You want someone to hit a certain calorie level and have a certain portions of carbs, fats, and proteins, yet you give them flexibility in their food choices, yet you ensure there's enough fiber, you ensure there's enough fruits and vegetables, and you give a certain amount of error on the 3 macronutrients. You allow them to be flexible with their schedule in terms of meal frequency. It's very similar in principle. Once you've identified what are the variables that are important and actually dictating your success primarily, then you can get as much flexibility as needed so long as you tick those boxes.
Boom shakalaka. So that was good. When we hear this isn't working, typically, right, that's something because it's an objective measure of this cycle, my 1RM didn't go up, right? That's typically how people get disappointed. What roadblocks or how do these kinds of challenges run in with like a bodybuilder who's like, okay, we threw all this extra volume at my chest and it's not bigger, you know? Do you guys run into that just as much too?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because it's easy,
Definitely.
not even easy, but it's easier to explain, like, okay, maybe your 1RM didn't go up, but we actually, you know, we have a big 6, and if 4 of your 6 went up and 2 didn't, you still collectively became a stronger human, right? That's an easy quote unquote sell for an athlete, right? They're pissed because their deadlift went down 5 pounds this particular testing cycle, but you're like, yeah, but your bench and your OHP and your squat went up, so like, deal with it. But as far as hypertrophy, the inches, the mirror, like how are ways that y'all like to explain that when someone's having a problem understanding and coping with the fact that they don't look the way they like after 3 months on a program or something?
Yeah, and that's a hard thing because, I mean, let's face it, the gains come really, really slow.
Yeah.
You know, and we're all impatient. You know, why isn't my chest bigger? Why isn't my back wider, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of times that's where the numbers geek will kind of come out of me. And I'll say, you know what? Okay, so let's look at this rationally. You know, you were doing things twice a week. That's 6 sets, 3 on one day, 3 on other. Okay, that hasn't changed. We instituted the 3rd day. Now you're doing 9. So we've increased the volume by 1/3. Mm-hmm. It's unquantifiable. It's undisputable. You are dealing with that deficiency right now as we speak. And just because it hasn't shown up yet, you know, doesn't mean either A, it won't, or B, it's not going to show up when you're lean again, you know, and we can actually see all of that work, you know. For folks that, you know, they do multi-time a week type of training on certain things, you know, I'll send them something new that will say, okay, you know what, we're going to keep this frequency, but we're going to divvy up volume differently. And so usually the first response is, you know, they'll look at the microcycle, the week of training, and they'll say, well, you know, this session here, how come it's less on this session here, you know, and I'll say, okay, now again, let's look at this rationally and let's look at the numbers. Okay, do 1 week of work for me, and then let's compare it. You know what I mean? And then, unfortunately, a lot of times they're like, wow, you know what? I don't even know what I was doing before. Well, you know what? Then we can't. That's not a rational comparison. We can't definitely say that volume went down or volume is the same, you know, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a lot of times that's when the numbers geek will come out in me, and I'll just have to say, look, it's gonna take time to see the inches come on, to see the gains come on. But here's what we know right now: there's more days in a week. Volume has gone up quantifiably through tonnage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we just need to keep doing it, you know. And then, of course, what's going to happen, you know, 6, 8, 9 months from now, only time is going to tell. And that's when we really start, you know, seeing either A, is it working, or B, is it not, you know. I'd venture to say that probably most of the time it's working in some way, shape, or form, you know.
Right.
Yeah. I would agree with Brad. Yeah, it's the same. Like, yeah, my first response was, well, when people say it's not working, is that really what's happening? Because there's basically 2 different things. It's someone who is impatient or unable to see progress because A, it takes a long time, and B, it's hard to see it underneath your body fat. Mm-hmm. And C, a lot of bodybuilders see their deficiencies, not their progress, kind of thing. Yeah. So you don't have an objective enough eye to see the minute progress, and there are barriers to seeing it. So then it's not really an issue of what do I do with your volume. It's how do I convince you to calm down and go with the plan. And sometimes you do make changes just to make them feel better. Like I think we talked about, the three of us in one of our old episodes, how we'll give someone core work. We'll give them ab work just because it'll alleviate their fears
Anxiety.
that they're going to lose. Yeah, they're going to lose their six pack or something like that. And we don't think it'll have any negative repercussions. So there's definitely times where I think I'm doing what needs to be done for a lagging body part. And, an 8-week muscle cycle will go by, like, I'm just really not noticing any differences. I'm like, yeah, let's just bump the accessory work on your curls up to 4 sets from 3. That'll probably, and that's just kind of like me just stroking their head and saying it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Go back to sleep. It was just a nightmare kind of thing. There's probably some clients right now who are laughing listening to that, knowing that I've done that to them.
I know.
But also there is this certain case of, I don't think we've progressed, and then you have to figure out what you need to do, and that's when you start I start going through the weeds of like, all right, how did you feel? Like, do you have tendonitis or the old injuries bothering you? Basically, I'm trying to find out, can I make them do even more? A lot of the times that's my first option, and then I do things like, especially with bodybuilders, like how effectively do you feel? The bench press in your chest, or is that where, like, as much as I don't like to talk about, you should be feeling the mind muscle connection. It's like,
but kind of
on especially,
move to dumbbells or
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes an exercise just doesn't necessarily fit someone's limb length. It's not that effective for them, or they don't have a great technique on it, or I haven't seen video. So I'll be like, all right, let's get some video. How does it feel? How recovered do you feel? And then I can start to assess whether we need a different vehicle to throw volume at them. Whether we need to increase accessory work or one of their big 6, 7, 8, 4, 3, whatever the heck the client is using to progress, or whether I'm wrecking them and that's not the way to go, and I need to figure out some other way to try to give them an adequate stimulus, or if it's nutritional or what, So.
Yeah. And I always try to, my first calm down is, okay, did you get stronger over this last 16 weeks? Yes. Did you get fatter? No. Then obviously we're doing the right thing, right? Did you get fat? No. Can you lift more? Yes. Then don't worry about it, But another thing that you said too, I was listening to you on the HPA podcast. I was stalking you, my friend, and I think you were talking about a study where hypertrophy, you were saying, is only 20% related to strength, or vice versa. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So there's been definitely some debate as to the contribution of hypertrophy to strength. And some of the more, I would say, fringe and extreme proponents of this are of the opinion that it's a very, very low percentage, even lower than 20%. Like they're totally unrelated qualities, which, doesn't really make sense from a physiological perspective. Why people take steroids, why do you hypertrophy? Why are higher weight classes stronger than others, especially when sometimes the height isn't that different.
Yeah.
And guys are just bigger. Why does going up a weight class typically make you stronger? Anyway, even on a Wilks perspective, just absolutely stronger. It wouldn't make sense if more muscle force wasn't generated by larger muscles.
Yeah.
Now it does make sense is when you look at some of the changes, the actual, not the raw amounts pre-post or at baseline, but the actual changes in strength, those don't always relate that strongly to hypertrophy, because strength is a multi-component thing. It's skill, there's neurological adaptations, there are other architectural changes to your body that don't include muscle hypertrophy, like changes in the arrangement of the fibers, changes in the angle of the tendon to the muscle to the joint that may change leverages on like a micro level you can't even tell. Those things all contribute to strength. So that if strength is going up, hypertrophy may have gone up, but it might have gone up very slightly. So if volume is going up, if your lift is going up, and like you said, if your body fat's not going up and your nutrition's in order, you have to put a little bit of faith into it, because you can't look inside the muscle and regularly ultrasound yourself or take biopsies and really know. So what do we have to go on? We know that hypertrophy is a component to strength, and it may be depending on training age and what measure of strength you're using, whether it's compound or single joint, and and all that it might be anywhere from 20% to higher. In my opinion, I'd say the low end, it's probably 20%, and that's a non-negligible amount in my opinion. So in absence of having some objective way to measure muscle hypertrophy, I would say the best thing we have is performance in the context of a sound training plan. Because I can tell when someone is in stage condition whether we've made progress in the last off season, but I wouldn't
until
want to
then,
tell them, wait 2 years. Well, we'll know when you get on stage. It's like, well, that's too late. You're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
How funny.
Well,
And
to expand on something that Eric just talked about that I find fascinating, and Eric, feel free to correct me at any time that I might be misspeaking, but there was a fascinating I think study that Mike Zerdos might have done, where they were actually doing muscle biopsies and actually doing ultrasounds and cross-sectional diameter on I want to say untrained athletes that were kind of either strict newbies or beginners, and they found that over the course of the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of training, there was no hypertrophy. Is that correct,
was a
Eric?
study that sort of Zerdos reported on that study. There's a few seminal studies where basically, and here's the issue, is that we can very sensitively assess changes in strength. We can get someone on a force plate and we can get changes in newtons. Mm-hmm. We can even do calibrated plates and get a half kilo increase in strength and record it. And however, with hypertrophy changes, even when we have an ultrasound or DEXA, there's a larger variation in the measurement error than there is in the biological. Yeah. There's more statistical noise than there is than the change. For example, there's a 6-month study on well-trained bodybuilders, like championship, like NPC, probably on anabolic steroids bodybuilders, pushing as hard as they can and looking at their bicep growth, and they couldn't detect any change over 6 months. And these guys are doing everything pharmacologically, training, nutrition-wise to get as big as possible, and it wasn't measurable over 6 months. Do I think there wasn't even a couple grams of muscle tissue added? There probably was. It's even like at the Olympia level, these guys might be getting bigger over time, but it's a very small amount. So typically what you will see and what you can measure more is that strength is increasing initially, and therefore it is ascribed more to neurological changes, and then only after that is the hypertrophy measurable. And I do think it's not just that it's happening so slowly that it takes 5 weeks to see the hypertrophy. I think it is partially that, but it is also that one is permissive to the other. Like if you don't have the motor skill and the ability to properly do a movement, you typically can't stress the muscle enough to actually get hypertrophy. So I think the study you're referring to is a pretty cool one where it was like, I think it's by Chilibeck, and it was the study where they did, So it's Chilibeck. They had them doing leg press and bench and curls, right? So they measured bicep, chest, and thigh hypertrophy, and they found that at the midway point, the biceps were the only muscle that had grown measurably. And it took till the end of the study for the trunk, your pecs and your quads to show growth. And if you think about it, the movements that were training those muscle groups were compound movements, so they're probably not going to be able to effectively learn as quickly as a bicep curl, a leg press, or a bench press to be able to stress the muscles that it grows. Mm-hmm. While the bicep curl, you're going to learn that it's arm flexion. Like it's pretty easy to do. So very early on, they're able to measure changes in bicep thickness, but not in the chest or the legs until the end, which just kind of shows you how intrinsically related the motor and the neurological and the architectural changes are that all contribute to strength.
Yeah. And what sucks too, and you had mentioned like we focus on our weaknesses, both with strength gain and fat loss, right? It's you are typically the thing that you want to grow the most. Everything else is going to grow before it, right? You're going to make changes and all this other stuff. I was just talking to a dude yesterday who was like, I want to lose belly fat. How do I do it? I'm like, you just need to lose fat. No, but like right here, I'm like, it's going to be the last thing you probably lose, but you just need to lose it everywhere, because you and it's the same as, again, with someone who's upset about not having growth. It's like, if you do have chest problems, or not problems. You do have an underdeveloped chest compared to the rest of you. As long as your bench is going up, everything else, because it's a full body movement, might be growing, and that visible change might be last, but and you think about it, everything else getting bigger would actually make it look smaller in your brain. So it's all, and it doesn't mean it's not getting stronger, and it's obviously lifting more weight than it was, but it's such a perception thing, and it sucks because it's like bodybuilding, subjective sport, but it's we create a lot of it for ourselves. Like, we create a lot of the unhappiness in this sport.
It'd be nice if when I was 6 weeks out, I was just like, man, my hamstrings and my chest look great, but I'm not, because those are my strong body parts that have always grown easily. I'm like, why can't my quads get leaner? And man, I need more lats, and damn this rib cage. And I think that's just kind of the psychology of it, is that being out of proportion looks bad, so you focus on the things that bring you out of proportion, not the things that are your strengths, which is something you have to do to succeed, but at the same time it's not always a healthy mind state to constantly be in.
Right.
And that's where a lot of times I like to go to my numbers, and have that reassurance, because I mean, how much are we limiting our growth just by our mental state? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Focusing on the fact that this is not growing, this is not growing, this is not growing. And so that's when a lot of times for me, the numbers will come out, and I'll just say, okay, my focus has been my lats now forever, to kind of overcompensate for my abnormally wide waist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll say, is my back truly getting wider? I'm not measuring it. I don't really care. But what I do know is that I'm doing more pull-ups than ever, and I have done them continuously now for years. And I'm not even really so much structuring them in specific progression in like weeks, but I'm structuring them more in progression in terms of like years. I can now do 25 continuous pull-ups. I couldn't do that even a year ago. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so to me, those numbers are very reassuring. I know my back's getting wider. I know, that I can feel more meat right here in my lats. And because I haven't been focusing on it, I've just been doing more work. I've just been doing the work and knowing that quantifiably, it's undeniable progress is being made.
Right.
It's funny, going to the psychology that I reported this and saying, what? But I talked about how people are more likely to achieve a goal if they focus on the process rather than the endpoint, because they get burned out by focusing on the endpoint. And
I love that. Yeah.
They lose kind of the love of it, because it's just this constant waiting to get to the top, So I honestly, as cliche as it might be, is sometimes you just have to put your head down, just do the work, and wait. Mm-hmm. And only thing you can put faith in is the fact that you're doing the work. It's like it's almost like how it sucks if you're really overweight, because you might have already lost 50 pounds and have another 100 that you need to lose. People are going to look at you and be thinking, why aren't you eating less, or why aren't you doing more cardio? It's like, well, dude, you don't just start that and lose 150 pounds in a day, like under construction kind of thing, and you have to remind yourself of that, because if other people are judging you that way, you're judging yourself even harsher. You wake up every morning going, God damn it, I still have 100 pounds to lose, rather than, hey, I'm doing the work and it's going to get there. So I think you really have to focus on the process.
And I think hindsight is the best way to do that. Like, if you obviously see yourself naked every day, but if you go look at a year ago, do you look different? And that's it. I feel like it's almost the times that I've been unhappiest with my strength gains or whatever, or like I'm smart enough to talk myself out of the fact that I'm obviously like progressing. It's not a big deal, but personally, the times where I felt like I was in ruts is because I feel like I was testing too often. Yeah. I expected it to change all the time. And like in this last year, I think I took like a year off of testing because I had like a groin injury, and then I switched sports and like all this stuff. And it was the biggest jump I've ever had. But if I was testing every 4 weeks, it might have gone up a pound, down a couple, up 5, down 10, but if I just wait that fucking long, it was like 10-pound PRs on everything, and it's, and the same
a lot of that's just psychological.
Well, yeah, and
because
that's
you're
what I'm
constantly
saying.
checking to see if it's like, the saying, watch pot never boils. It's like you want your shit to be boiling now. It's going to boil no matter what in 7 minutes if you fucking wait.
Yeah.
But if you are doing an every minute check, then it feels like it's never happening, and you failed 7 times before it actually boils, which is what people experience when they try to max too often or AMRAP.
Yeah, and people in prep too, if it's like, okay, it's been 3 months, I've lost like 5 pounds, but I'm getting closer to stage, it's like, okay, go look at yourself 3 months ago. It might not be a huge difference in body weight, but look at yourself, you know. And the same thing with me now is, I think I did like 14 months, right, since I a progress pic. I posted on my Instagram like, I don't know, 6 months ago, and I think y'all all comment on it too, but I didn't get in my bathing suit and take pictures for over a year. And the whole year, I didn't think, I was like, well, I'm having fun, you know? And I was like, oh shit, I look really different. And I didn't even notice it. But had I been, you know, doing the bikini pictures every week, I wouldn't notice a difference, especially in the off season.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think, again, it's just a mind ninja way of doing it. Like you said, it's self-inflicted, but it would be really crazy if you actually were someone listening to this podcast and cared about these things. It would be really crazy if you couldn't look at yourself a year ago and notice improvements. So I would say, you know, a good way is just like set yourself a goal. If you usually test every 4 to 8 weeks, okay, don't test for 16, or maybe do AMRAPs instead of 1RMs or something. But if testing is always depressing for you, like, I think there's ways to, I don't want to say get around it, especially if you're a powerlifter, but there's so many ways you can assess yourself in strength and physique.
It's another value of the RPE scale too. Like if last time 150 kilos for a double was an 8, and now it's a 7. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Right? You know? Yeah. Which is a useful thing for the advanced lifters who might not even be able to see progress that visible on a year-to-year basis. Is kind of like Brad was saying. He's like, you know, 2 years ago I couldn't do 25 pull-ups. You have to match your measure of progress to your training age. And that's another one of the things I do when I assess. I was like, all right, is an 8-week mesocycle actually an appropriate amount of time for me to test this guy and expect to see significant jumps on the majority of the lifts? Maybe not. Maybe we do an AMRAP and then to a 9, and then we just extend his block another 6 weeks. You know, and I've definitely done that. I've got one client who is, you know, been a high level strength athlete and now moving to bodybuilding, and you know, we have to program in a way that doesn't expect progress on a very frequent basis. So you have to kind of really build the blocks up and have it be kind of a steady incremental thing, and then test after a decent amount of time's gone by.
Needed.
So, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, I mean, that basically kind of is our whole, you know, theme of the podcast. It's like you have to have a plan, you know, and everybody's plan is going to be a little bit different, you know. But you have to know that there's going to be times when it's going to be really freaking hard, and you're going to feel like you're going to break, and then there's going to be times when it's going to be really freaking easy, and it's feeling too easy, you know. And there's a lot of different reasons why those things happen. But having that plan, don't look at, I'm doing chest on Monday, legs on Tuesday, you know, don't look at that. Look at, okay, I loved, for example, when Eric started programming AMRAPs at the end of an 8-week block. So we don't test, but I think every 16 or 32 weeks or something like that, as far as a true 1 rep max test. But I loved how he would say, we're going to take this to a heavy triple stop at a 9 RPE or something like that. I love that, because what ended up happening is like, wow, I can now do 405 pounds for 3 sets of 3. I couldn't do that. I could not do that even, I don't even think six months ago. And on top of that, it didn't really feel that hard, you know? So there I've got, number 1, progress is being made. Number 2, this is what it feels like to be recovered. This is what it feels like to have all of that fatigue go away. It's not that this was supposed to be easy, but 2 things happened right there. They kind of came together in a perfect storm in a way. I was stronger, progress was made, but it just so happened that it wasn't intended to be easy. It just happened because fatigue was gone.
Yeah. And I think what's cool about it is that, or I don't want to say cool about it, something that I've discovered in myself this past year and that you just kind of talked about too, is that if you only have like one fucking goal, like if it's 1 RM, like you're going to be depressed. But if you're looking for them, there's so many ways to get better. Like, I could do 5 pull-ups a year ago, but now I can do them like without resting at the bottom. I could do like AMRAPs got way better. I think I got a little stronger more than anything. I'm a more confident back squatter right now. Like, I'm not scared of it if it feels heavy. I know I'm going to be okay. Bench press, my form is so much tighter. My handstand push-up 10 rep is like 4 seconds faster than it used to be. Like, I'm looking for shit. I'm not kidding. Like, every day I'm getting better at something, but it's because I am looking for something. And even if it's
finding more avenues.
Yeah. And like yesterday, because I Snapchat my whole freaking life, right? But yesterday, for the first time after, I don't know, a couple months of letting my knee heal, I did double unders, which is like jump ropey things. I still suck at them. And I remember I recorded a video, put it on Snapchat, and I was like, with a text, was like, those are gross. 2 minutes later, I did another set, and I was like, you know what? Go snap again. And I had to write, you know what? I lied. Shouldn't have said that. What I meant to say was I'm excited to work on these because they get better. And my improvement was that I turned my brain around within like a couple minutes, and I didn't dwell on the fact that they still suck. It was like, I can't wait to work on them. And I'm not saying like toot my own horn or whatever, but it's like, I'm conscious of my brain when I'm training. I'm conscious to look for the positives and the small things. Like you said, Brad, like I can do 4 or 5 for 3x3. Like, there's volume PRs always to be had.
Well, I think that's a great point. It's like, so like, that's why I don't, even if I really bought into the fact that the best way to get bigger at best of the big 3 was to only do the big 3, which I don't think is true.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have people only do big 3 because it's hard to get. What do you do when you're one of those ruts where nothing's improving? It's very mentally difficult, and you have to be creative, and you have to think of ways to see the progress and to keep yourself going. Like 3x3 at 405. Brad might have done 3 at 405, but he hasn't done 3x3 at 405.
Right.
That's a volume PR, right? Or it's a lower RPE than, last time it was probably a grindy ass 10. This time, even the last set was a 9.
Yeah.
So I mean, like you said, like the mental state of having a bad workout being better is a PR. Like, I didn't cry at the end of my workout when it was terrible and I was 3 weeks out and I was on my period. That's a PR if you did last year. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, and that shit so too, like, right? Like, I'm like
100%.
If I'm tired in the morning, I'm like, it doesn't matter when I get to the gym, I'm going to be fine. Whereas someone who's weak might be like, this is not a day to go to the gym. Like, that's an improvement. Like, I feel like...
Or the person who realizes, actually, it would be better for me not to go to the gym, and they used to go and get down. Yeah. Yeah,
so, I mean, everything's relative, but I feel like it's completely up to you as far as how much progress you see. Again, unless you have a shit program, or unless you are very depressed or whatever. But if you're a normal trainee who doesn't have to, like, make themselves go to the gym every day, you love this stuff, I can guarantee that there's some victory every day. Of some sort. Even if it's, oh shit, you stuck to your pre-workout mobility routine for all 5 days this time instead of cutting it short because you didn't feel like it one day. Or, like, it's all victories that contribute to you being, a year from now, a stronger human and lifter. So.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and shoot, just a lot of times just getting the work done is a victory. And that 3x3 at 405, there was a ton of work that was done at 70% of that weight. And there was good days, and there was bad days, and there was days when it felt heavy, and there was days when it felt light, But I always like to say, you know what? And I've kind of changed my mindset now, thinking that, I used to say workout a lot, but now I like to say session or training session a lot, because all of those training sessions that happened, I just totally lost my train of thought. I had a really good point there.
I can pick it up. Want me to go? Want to go with it?
Yeah. Maybe you were in tune with me.
Yeah, like I thought the same way. Like, the workout, something special had to happen in that session. And now when I take a step back and I have to do more volume to accomplish something, I can appreciate, damn it, I had a really hard life. I was coaching. I was doing a PhD. I had niggles and pain, but I got through every bit of prescribed volume, and damn it if it didn't pay off at the end. And just being able to say I did that while having all that other stuff going on, I wasn't in a great mood, I didn't really enjoy it, I may have had to take 8-minute rest periods, but I got it all done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can feel like such a victory sometimes as well, instead of looking at it, like Brad said, on a day-to-day, workout-to-workout basis.
Yeah. And even, like you said, too, you're becoming a more mature athlete saying this isn't a day I'm supposed to train. Or becoming a more, like in my case, one of the things that I can say I got better at this year, too, with my injuries, as pissed as I was that I had injuries, it's like, but I still showed up and I didn't make them worse. Because for the first 3 or 4 months, I was making it worse. And so, like, the last 6 months, it was like, okay, I'm actually listening to it. And that's a big skill that'll carry me for however long. But there's always skills to be developed outside of the 1RM is all. I think we all just agreed with each other for 10 minutes. So that was nice.
Yeah. I remember the point that I was going to make is I'm going to make a bumper sticker that says a bad day in the gym is better than any good day at work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a bad day in the gym if you think about the context of life, you know?
Yeah.
I think people would buy that.
All right, let's do it.
You should trademark that. That's copyrighted.
Yeah, maybe we should.
No one is allowed to use that as listening.
Yeah. I do think, though, I think we should say after all these tools that we've talked about and all these ninjaing tricks and ways to whatever, is that it doesn't have to be that complicated. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Like when you have someone who starts flexible dieting, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. You're like, wait, I can eat anything? Shit. It's so much easier when all I could eat was these 4 healthy bro foods. Yeah. And it's like this catch-22. It's like you go from very, very clear but very, very stressful and annoying and bland diet to too much freedom and not knowing how to do it all. And I think that's the same thing can happen with training when you listen to this and you're like, oh God, RPE, flexible periodization.
I'll just do whatever I feel like.
Yeah, it's like whatever, I'm just going to train hard kind of thing. So really, it's just you want to see progressive overload over time, and you want to make sure that if you're going to test, you're recovered when you do it, and that you do more work when needed and only enough to make progress if you aren't progressing. And it should be more or less specific towards your goal. So you don't need to be doing 1RMs if you're just a pure bodybuilder, but you want to somehow test, whether that's an AMRAP at 85% or 90% or whatever, using a variety of rep ranges and a variety of appropriate exercises. And just having a structure to it and having a plan can be very simple, a basic progression. Build volume up, let it come down, let the loads go up, take a light week, test, rinse and repeat.
Word.
So, yeah, and RPE can be useful because it can tell you how far from failure you are. And having a flexible schedule can allow you to get all the volume in and not think that it's bad because you switched your day from Friday to Saturday.
Alrighty. And on that note, thanks for hanging out, guys.
Word.
Thank you.
Great one. Yeah. All right. Talk to y'all soon. See ya.
Bye-bye.